The wind did not sound like weather. It sounded like something searching. Every gust swept across the white valley with such force that even the tall pines bent away, as if they already knew who would lose if they resisted. Somewhere inside that endless storm, a lone rider struggled to stay in the saddle. The woman could barely see the horse's ears. The trail had vanished. The sky had vanished. Even the mountains had disappeared behind walls of blowing snow. Only one thought stayed clear inside her mind. If she stopped moving, the mountain would quietly bury her before morning. If stories like this stay with you, walk beside this one until the end. Some journeys begin only after everything else is lost. The widow leaned low over the gray mare's neck while sharp flakes stung every piece of skin the scarf could not protect. Frost clung to her eyelashes. Every breath left her mouth in short white clouds before the wind tore them away. Her name was Eleanor Hayes, only 32 years old, already carrying more silence than most people gathered in a lifetime. 6 months earlier, she had buried her husband beside a small church outside Willow Creek. After selling the ranch they had built together, she accepted work as a schoolteacher farther west. She believed new land might quiet the empty rooms inside her heart. Instead, the mountains had other plans. The mare stumbled. Eleanor climbed down without hesitation. She placed one gloved hand against the horse's shoulder. The animal kept weight off its front leg, not broken, but strained badly. "Easy, girl," the words disappeared into the wind almost before they reached the horse's ears. Ahead, the wagon train that had traveled with her was already gone, not because they abandoned her, because nobody could see anyone anymore. The storm had swallowed every wheel, every voice, every lantern. Only white remained. Eleanor wrapped the reins around her wrist and began walking. Step after careful step. Snow reached almost to her knees. Each movement demanded more strength than the one before it. The cold slowly climbed through her boots until she could no longer tell whether her feet were numb or simply gone. Still, she kept moving. She had learned long ago that stopping invited things no person wanted waiting beside them. The valley grew quieter. That frightened her more than the wind. Even the storm seemed distant here. Tall cliffs blocked part of the gale, leaving only drifting snow floating through dark pine branches. The silence pressed against her ears. Then something caught her eye. Not sunlight. Not lightning. A warm amber glow. Small, steady, almost hidden beneath a heavy blanket of snow. Eleanor blinked once. The light remained. She looked harder. Half buried beneath the hillside stood what appeared to be a cabin built into the earth itself. Only the stone chimney, one narrow window, and part of the roof escaped the deep drifts. Smoke drifted upward in slow gray ribbons. Someone was alive inside, or had been recently. The mare lifted her head. Animals noticed warmth before people did. Together they moved toward the hidden shelter. The path down the slope barely deserved the name. Old wagon ruts had disappeared beneath winter. Tree roots hid beneath the snow. Loose stones rolled beneath Eleanor's boots. Twice she nearly fell. Twice the mare steadied her instead. When they reached the bottom, the cabin looked older than the valley itself. Massive pine logs locked together so tightly that almost no daylight could pass between them. Stone walls disappeared into the hillside. Whoever built it had planned for storms exactly like this one. Every beam, every window, every angle spoke of patience earned through hard winters. A lean-to-stable rested against the back wall. Eleanor pushed open the rough wooden door. Warm air carrying the smell of hay drifted outside. A lantern already burned from the center beam. Inside stood one large bay horse, calm and healthy. Its saddle hung neatly nearby. Someone cared deeply for this place. She removed her mare's saddle, covered her with a dry blanket folded beside the stall, rubbed the strained leg until the horse relaxed. "You've earned your rest." The mare lowered her head into fresh hay. Only then did Eleanor walk toward the cabin. She knocked once. Nothing. She waited. Only the wind answered. She knocked harder. Still nothing. Her fingers rested carefully on the iron handle. Unlocked. She hesitated. Walking into another person's home without permission went against everything she believed. But freezing outside helped no one. She slowly opened the door. Warmth rushed over her face so suddenly that her skin almost hurt. A wide stone fireplace filled one end of the room. Orange flames danced across polished logs. Books covered shelves from floor to ceiling. A heavy table stood near the center. Every chair matched. Every tool rested exactly where it belonged. Nothing felt abandoned. Yet nobody stood inside. Eleanor quietly removed her gloves, held both hands toward the fire. Life slowly returned to stiff fingers. Only then did she notice three things. A faded blue woman's shawl rested across a rocking chair. A small wooden horse and cloth doll sat untouched on a high shelf, and above the fireplace, a framed photograph faced the wall. Not fallen. Placed that way. Deliberately, Eleanor lowered her eyes. Some memories asked not to be disturbed. Footsteps, slow, measured, not from outside, from somewhere deeper inside the house. A hidden door opened beside the bookshelves. A tall man stepped into the room carrying a wood plane in one hand. Fine sawdust covered his sleeves. A fresh scrape crossed his knuckles. He stopped the instant he saw her. Neither spoke. The fire cracked between them. His eyes studied everything. Her wet coat. The snow melting onto the floor. Her empty hands. The exhaustion she could no longer hide. Finally, he set the tool down beside the workbench. "You found the valley," he said quietly. Eleanor swallowed before answering. "I wasn't looking for it." His gaze shifted briefly toward the window where the storm continued to roar beyond the glass. Then back to her. Most people never do. The stranger did not ask who she was. He did not ask why she had entered his home. Instead, he walked past her without hurry, opened the iron kettle hanging above the fire, and poured steaming coffee into a thick clay cup. He placed it on the table. "Drink while your hands still remember how." Eleanor wrapped both hands around the warm cup. The heat climbed slowly through her fingers. She had not realized how badly they were shaking until they finally stopped. The man bent to place another log onto the fire. Only after the flames settled did he finally speak again. "My name is Nathan Carter." His voice carried the rough edges of years spent talking more to mountains than to people. "Eleanor Hayes." He nodded once. Nothing more. No questions. No unnecessary kindness. Only quiet understanding. That alone made the room feel safer. Outside, the wind struck the walls again. The cabin barely noticed. The heavy logs absorbed every blow without complaint. Nathan watched the fire for a moment. That storm will own these mountains for at least 3 days. Eleanor lowered her eyes toward the coffee. "I suppose I'm your guest until it lets me leave. You'll stay until it's safe." Not because he sounded welcoming, because he sounded certain. He disappeared through the narrow doorway near the kitchen. Moments later, the smell of fresh stew filled the room. Beef, potatoes, carrots, wild herbs. The simple meal carried the comfort only slow cooking could create. Nathan placed a bowl in front of her. "Eat." She almost apologized for accepting so much from a stranger. Instead, she picked up the spoon. The first bite reminded her how hungry she truly was. Nathan returned to his chair beside the fireplace. He never watched her eat. That small courtesy spoke louder than conversation. When the bowl was empty, Eleanor finally looked around the cabin with fresh eyes. Every shelf held books, maps, handmade tools, carefully carved wooden boxes. Nothing expensive, everything useful. Every object carried signs of years of careful hands. No wasted space, no wasted effort. Her eyes stopped at the rocking chair. The faded blue shawl still rested across it. She looked toward Nathan. "Your wife?" His hands paused around the coffee cup, only for a heartbeat. Then they moved again. "My daughter folded that shawl." Eleanor remained silent. He continued without looking at her. "My wife passed 9 winters ago." Another pause. "My little girl the following spring." The room became very still. Nathan reached toward the fire with the poker. He adjusted a burning log that did not truly need adjusting. "I never moved either one." Eleanor looked again at the shawl, then toward the wooden horse resting beside the rag doll. Nobody had touched those things for years, yet someone dusted them every week. She understood that without asking. Some people protected memories the same way others protected gold. Nathan stood. "I should check your mare. I'll help. You've walked enough today." He pulled on his heavy coat and disappeared into the storm. Eleanor remained beside the fire. Her eyes wandered toward the bookshelves. One shelf held journals. Every leather spine carried a year, all the way to the present winter. Beside them rested rolled blueprints tied with leather straps. She gently touched one. Inside lay careful drawings of bridges, water channels, schoolhouses, barns, entire farms. Each line had been measured with remarkable care. Nathan was more than a carpenter. He built futures. A floorboard creaked behind her. She quickly stepped away from the drawings. Nathan returned carrying snow across his boots. "Your mare will heal." Relief slipped quietly through Eleanor's chest. "Thank you." He noticed where she had been standing. "You looked at the plans. I hope you don't mind. I drew them to be useful." He carried the blueprints to the table. "Spread one open. This valley floods every spring." The drawing showed channels carved through the hills, stone walls, small reservoirs. If the water is guided before it reaches the farms, he tapped the page. "The valley survives." Eleanor studied the careful measurements. "You planned all this alone?" He nodded. "Someone has to think about next winter while everyone else worries about today." She smiled without realizing it. "You sound like my husband." Nathan looked up. His expression changed almost too quickly to notice. "What was his name?" "Samuel Hayes." The room became silent again. Nathan slowly folded the blueprint. His fingers stopped halfway. "Samuel Hayes," he repeated the name as though searching through years that had nearly faded. "You knew him?" Nathan stared into the fire. For several long seconds he said nothing. Then he quietly answered. "We served together." Eleanor's heartbeat slowed. Samuel had rarely spoken about the war. Whenever she asked, he simply smiled and changed the subject. "You were friends?" Nathan rubbed the fresh scrape across his hand. "He saved my life." Nothing else followed. Eleanor waited. Nathan stood and walked toward the window. Snow covered almost everything outside. "You should sleep." She recognized the change. He had closed a door inside himself. Pushing now would only make it harder to open later. She carried the empty bowl to the sink. Nathan accepted it with a small nod. As she turned toward the hallway, something caught her eye. On the workbench near the hidden doorway rested a fresh piece of cedar. Someone had been carving letters into it. Only one word had been finished. "Samuel." Her breath stopped. Nathan had not noticed she was looking. She quickly turned away before he followed her eyes. Inside the small bedroom, Eleanor closed the door gently. The quilt felt warm. The storm continued outside, yet sleep refused to come. Much later, long after the fire had settled into glowing coals, she heard another sound. Tap, pause, tap, pause, the steady rhythm of a carving knife working through wood. Nathan had returned to the workshop. He was awake again, carving her husband's name into cedar while the entire valley slept. Before morning came, Eleanor made one quiet decision. She would not leave this hidden valley until she discovered why a man she had never met carried Samuel Hayes inside his memories as carefully as he carried every piece of wood in his workshop. Before we go further, what do you think Nathan is hiding about Samuel? I'd truly like to hear your thoughts before the story continues. Morning arrived without sunlight. The storm had weakened, but thick clouds still covered the mountains. Snow rested against the cabin windows almost halfway up the glass. The valley looked trapped beneath a world of white. Eleanor dressed quietly. As soon as she stepped into the main room, she noticed Nathan standing beside the stove. Fresh biscuits rested beneath a cloth. Coffee steamed from 2 cups. He had already been awake for hours. "You sleep at all?" she asked. He poured coffee without turning around. Enough, she knew that answer meant no. While they ate, neither spoke very much. The silence between them no longer felt awkward. It felt earned. When breakfast ended, Nathan reached for his coat. "The mare needs to stretch her leg." "I'll come." He looked toward her boots. "The snow is deep. I've walked through worse." For the first time, the corner of his mouth lifted slightly. Fair enough. They crossed the yard together. The storm had left the world untouched. Every pine branch carried heavy snow. Every fence rail disappeared beneath white drifts. Even sound seemed softer. Inside the stable, Mabel greeted Eleanor with a gentle push of her nose. Nathan carefully examined the injured leg. "The swelling is coming down." Relief settled quietly inside Eleanor. She stroked the mare's neck. "I knew you'd make it." Nathan moved toward his own horse. The powerful bay gelding stood perfectly still while Nathan checked every strap and buckle. "You've trained him well." Nathan brushed loose snow from the saddle. "He trained me." Eleanor smiled. "I've never heard anyone say that. A horse teaches patience faster than people do." She watched him for a moment. There was nothing careless about the man. Every movement had purpose. Every knot was tied correctly. Every tool returned exactly where it belonged. People did not become that careful without first surviving years when mistakes carried a price. As they walked back toward the cabin, Eleanor noticed several fresh stumps beyond the trees. Perfectly cut. Each one measured to nearly the same height. "You harvested those recently?" Nathan nodded. "Enough for this winter. You always prepare this far ahead?" "I've learned storms don't care whether a man feels ready." Those words stayed with her. Back inside, Nathan disappeared into the workshop. The door remained slightly open. The steady scrape of carving tools echoed through the cabin. Eleanor hesitated only a moment before walking closer. He looked up as she entered. "You don't have to stand at the doorway." She stepped inside. The workshop felt different from the rest of the cabin. Warmer, brighter. Every wall held carefully arranged tools. Wood shavings covered the floor like curled ribbons. Half-finished chairs rested beside elegant cabinets. A child's cradle stood against one wall. Its smooth rails gleamed in the morning light. "You built all these?" Nathan nodded. "They keep my hands busy." Her eyes drifted toward the cedar carving. Samuel's name had been completed. Each letter was cut with remarkable care. "You knew my husband well." Nathan placed the carving knife on the bench. "We rode together for nearly 3 years. He never mentioned your name." "He wouldn't." Eleanor waited. Nathan rested both hands against the workbench. The war gave men things they couldn't carry home. His eyes remained fixed on the cedar. "We learned to leave some stories where they happened." She slowly stepped closer. "My husband rarely spoke about those years." Nathan nodded once. "Neither did I." The silence stretched. Finally, Eleanor asked the question that had followed her since the first night. "Why were you carving his name?" Nathan closed his eyes briefly. Not to avoid the answer. To steady himself before speaking. "Because I never finished saying goodbye." The words settled heavily inside the workshop. Eleanor did not interrupt. Nathan opened a drawer beneath the workbench. From inside, he removed a worn leather notebook. Its edges had softened from years of careful handling. He placed it gently between them. Samuel gave me this." Eleanor looked at the cover. Her husband's initials were pressed into the leather. She recognized them instantly. He carried this everywhere. Nathan nodded. "The night before our final ride, he handed it to me." Eleanor looked up. "Final ride?" Nathan's breathing slowed. "We were ordered to deliver military reports across the northern pass." He walked toward the window overlooking the valley. "I was supposed to lead. What happened?" "I became sick." He stared into the falling snow. "High fever. I couldn't stay on my horse." Eleanor remained perfectly still. Samuel took my place. The room felt smaller. He said the mission couldn't wait. Nathan's voice remained calm, but his fingers slowly closed into a fist beside the window. I argued. He refused. He smiled. Nathan swallowed once, and told me he'd return before I finished recovering. The workshop fell silent. Outside, snow slipped from a pine branch with a soft rush. He never came back. Eleanor lowered her eyes. For years she had believed Samuel simply died in battle. Now another piece of that day stood before her. Alive, breathing, still carrying it. Nathan reached into the notebook. Between its pages rested an old photograph. 3 young soldiers. One of them was Samuel. Another was Nathan. The third smiled broadly, almost like a boy. My younger brother. Nathan touched the picture gently. "Daniel?" Eleanor looked closer. "He died too?" Nathan nodded. "Same winter." The workshop suddenly explained itself. The books, the careful order, the untouched toys, the endless carving. A man surrounded by things that refused to leave him. Eleanor carefully closed the notebook. "You've been carrying all of them alone." Nathan gave a tired smile. "I thought that was my job." She looked directly into his eyes. "No." He frowned slightly. "My husband chose that ride. You didn't send him. You didn't force him." Nathan looked away. "I've repeated those words thousands of times. They never stayed." Eleanor stepped toward the workbench. She placed one hand beside the cedar carving. "Then maybe you've been repeating the wrong words." He looked back at her. For the first time since she arrived, she saw moisture gathering at the corner of his eyes. He quickly turned away before it could fall. Outside, the clouds finally began to break. Thin sunlight reached across the valley for the first time since the storm began. Golden light slipped through the workshop window, landing directly across Samuel's carved name. Neither of them spoke. They simply watched the light rest there. And for the first time in many years, Nathan did not reach to turn it away. The next morning arrived clear. The storm had finally surrendered. Fresh snow covered the valley like untouched linen sparkling beneath the winter sun. Smoke drifted slowly from Nathan's chimney, rising into a sky so blue it almost seemed impossible that only days earlier the same mountains had tried to bury everything beneath them. Eleanor stepped outside carrying 2 cups of coffee. Nathan was repairing a split section of the stable fence. His movements were steady. No hurry, no wasted effort. She handed him one of the cups. For a while they simply stood together, watching the sunlight spread across the valley. "It almost looks peaceful now," Eleanor said. Nathan looked toward the mountain pass. "It always does after a storm." His words carried a meaning beyond the weather. Eleanor understood. She reached into her coat and removed the leather notebook Samuel had once carried. "I think this belongs with you." Nathan slowly shook his head. "No, it was his. And now it's yours." She looked down at the worn cover. "Then why did you keep it all these years?" Nathan rested both hands on the fence rail. "Because I wasn't ready to let him go." He looked across the valley where snow rested quietly beneath the pine trees. "I thought holding on to everything meant I was honoring the people I lost." He smiled faintly, but somewhere along the way, he glanced toward the empty rocking chair visible through the cabin window. "I stopped living too." Eleanor placed the notebook back inside her coat. My husband never stayed still. Nathan nodded. No. He always believed people should leave a place better than they found it. Nathan looked toward the open meadow below the cabin. The children in these mountains ride nearly 2 hours just to reach the nearest school. She followed his gaze. I noticed there isn't one nearby. There used to be. What happened? The roof collapsed during a heavy winter. He looked toward the distant valley. No one rebuilt it. Silence settled between them. Not empty. Thoughtful. Then Eleanor spoke. You still have those building plans. Nathan looked at her. I do. You know how to build. I do. She smiled gently. And I know how to teach. Nathan lowered his eyes for a moment. When he looked back, something had changed. Not excitement. Not surprise. Hope often arrived much quieter than either. It would take months. I know. We'd have to clear the ground before spring. I know. The children would need books. I can help with that. Nathan slowly looked across the valley again. This time he wasn't seeing snow. He was seeing possibilities. For the first time in years, the future reached farther than the next sunrise. 3 days later, the valley road reopened completely. Eleanor saddled Mabel before sunrise. The mare walked without a limp. Nathan tightened the final strap. She'll do fine. I think so too. Neither of them seemed eager to say goodbye. Some farewells became harder because too much had finally been understood. Nathan disappeared into the workshop for a moment. When he returned, he carried a small wooden box. Hand-carved. Smooth, simple, he handed it to Eleanor. She opened the lid. Inside rested the cedar carving. Samuel. Beneath it lay another small piece of cedar. Blank. She looked at Nathan. For new memories, he said quietly, so the old ones don't have to carry everything alone. Eleanor gently closed the lid. She understood. Without another word, she placed the box safely inside her saddlebag. She climbed onto Mabel. Nathan stepped back. You'll reach Willow Junction before dark. I'll be back before spring. His eyes searched hers for a moment. I'll begin clearing the school site. I'll bring books. He nodded once. No promises beyond that. None were needed. Eleanor guided Mabel toward the mountain road. After several hundred yards, she looked back. Nathan still stood beside the cabin. The hidden shelter no longer looked lonely. Smoke continued rising from the chimney. The morning sun rested across the roof. For the first time, it looked less like a place someone had hidden from the world and more like a place waiting for people to find it. Winter slowly gave way to spring. Snow melted into clear streams. Wildflowers returned to the valley floor. Day after day, Nathan shaped timber while Eleanor traveled between Willow Junction and the valley with wagons full of books, desks, chalkboards, blankets, and supplies donated by families who had heard about the little mountain school. Neighbors who had barely spoken for years arrived carrying hammers. Farmers brought stone. Blacksmiths forged hinges. Women stitched curtains. Children gathered fallen branches for the stove. By early summer, the school stood proudly where only deep snow had covered the ground months before. Its wide windows welcomed morning sunlight. Its porch overlooked the valley. Its bell could be heard across the hills. On opening day, 12 children filled the room. Some had never attended a single lesson. Some had walked miles before sunrise just to sit inside. Nathan stood quietly outside near the doorway while Eleanor greeted each child. One little boy stopped beside him. "Did you build this?" Nathan looked at the building, then at the child. "We all did." The boy smiled and ran inside. Nathan remained where he was. The sound of children laughing drifted through the open windows. It filled places inside the valley that had been silent for many years. Eleanor stepped onto the porch. She looked toward the distant mountain pass where the blizzard had nearly ended her journey. Instead, It had carried her somewhere she had never planned to find. Not another home, not a replacement for what had been lost. Something entirely different. A future built one careful piece at a time. Nathan joined her on the porch. Neither spoke. Below them, children chased one another across the grass where snow had once buried the earth. The valley no longer waited for another storm. It had begun waiting for another morning. If this story stayed with you, I'd love for you to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. Your support helps keep these frontier stories alive, and there are many more waiting just beyond the next mountain.